The valley had heard it many times before the sun settled high overhead, while the mist still clung to the ground like a damp cloth. He would appear, a man too large to be merely a man. The iron of his armor flung back the light in harsh blows, as if daylight itself were afraid to touch him. And when he opened his mouth, it was not only the voice of a warrior, it was the voice of humiliation. "Choose one of your men." The words fell into the valley like a stone. The Israelites, lined up on this side, gripped spears that no longer looked like spears. They looked like excuses. On the other side, the Philistines waited like people who already knew the ending. And in the center, the giant repeated the same ritual day after day, like a priest of a profane liturgy, turning fear into law. Saul, the king, listened from afar. He was not in the middle of the dust. He was under canvas and shadow, inside tents that smelled of leather and worry. When the shout came, his counselors shifted as if they could rearrange the air. But no one rearranges fear with words. And what hurt was not only the threat of death. It was what fear did to the soul of the people. It bowed their heads, and every bowed head becomes an altar. That day, however, someone arrived who did not come with his head bowed. He came down the road at an unhurried pace, carrying bread and cheese wrapped up, as if the war were only a distant noise and not the center of the world. His shoulders were young, his face sunburnt, his eyes alert, like someone who had learned to watch the fields while everyone else slept. His name was David. He did not arrive as a soldier, he arrived as a brother, sent by his father Jesse with provisions for the 3 older sons who were in the army. No glory, no sword, no armor, only faithfulness. When David crossed the camp, the first thing he felt was the tension. Men speaking too softly, short laughs, eyes that fled the horizon as if out there in the distance lived a question with no answer. And then the valley did what it always did. Goliath came out. When the giant began to speak, the whole camp seemed to shrink. Some turned their faces away, others squeezed the spear shaft until their knuckles went white, and many took a step back. Just one step, but a step enough to teach the heart. It can't be done. David saw that and did not understand. He could not understand how a people who had crossed the sea with Moses could tremble before one man. He could not understand how the stories told around the fire of Abraham, of Joshua, of so many unlikely victories could become weak memories when the present began to shout. He looked at a soldier beside him and asked, as if asking the obvious, "What will be given to the man who defeats this Philistine?" The soldier answered without enthusiasm, as if reciting a prize no one believed would ever be awarded. Riches, the king's daughter, exemption from taxes, things that sounded great, but not as great as the shame. David did not ask again, but something in him lit up. Eliab, his oldest brother, heard and grew angry. The anger came from fear in disguise. Fear often dresses itself as indignation, so it won't be ashamed. "Why did you come here?" Eliab snarled. "And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption. You only came to watch the battle." David felt the blow. It was not the first time they had called him small, but there is a kind of injustice that doesn't just wound pride, it wounds the mission. He drew a breath and answered without shouting, "What have I done now? I only asked," and he turned away. Because there are moments when arguing with someone else's fear is a waste of time. David was looking for something else. He was looking for the truth. He spoke to others, asked once more and again, until the rumor began to run, "There's a boy, a shepherd, saying he can face the giant." Rumors travel fast where hope is in short supply. They brought David to Saul. Inside the royal tent, the air felt heavier. Saul's eyes bore the mark of many sleepless nights. He was tall, taller than most, and yet he still seemed smaller than his own office. The king looked at David and saw a boy, and he said what logic says when faith is treated as recklessness. "You cannot go. You are young." He has been a warrior since his youth. David did not answer with poetry. He answered with memory. "I was tending my father's sheep when a lion came, or a bear, and carried off a sheep from the flock. I ran after it. I struck it and tore the sheep from its mouth. And if it turned on me, I seized it by the throat and killed it." The tent fell silent. David was not telling this to show off. He was telling it because it was the truth. He had faced death before, not on a battlefield, but on the ground of duty. And the courage born of duty is different from the courage born of applause. "The Lord delivered me from the lion and the bear," David concluded, "and he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul listened, and for an instant the boy's faith touched the king's soul like an ember. "Go," Saul said, almost as if handing over something he no longer knew how to carry. "And may the Lord be with you." But Saul was still Saul, and he did what every fear does when it tries to help. He offered his armor. They dressed David in the weight of the king: helmet, breastplate, sword, straps, cold metal on young skin. David took a few steps, and the sound of iron betrayed a simple truth. It wasn't his. He stopped, not out of rebellion, out of clarity. "I can't walk in this. I'm not used to it." And calmly, he took it all off, one piece at a time, like someone refusing to put on another person's anxiety. When he left the tent without armor, some laughed. Others were indignant. But David was not trying to prove anything. He was trying to obey. He went to the stream. The war was near, but there, water still ran. And there is something mysterious in that. The world can shout, but creation keeps doing its quiet work. David knelt, plunged his hand in, and chose 5 smooth stones. Not stones of anger, stones of precision. He took his sling, simple, worn with use, familiar as his own pulse, and placed the stones in his pouch. Then he walked toward the valley. That was when the silence changed. When a man goes down to face shame, the air notices. Goliath saw David and did not understand. His eyes searched for sword, spear, shield. He saw only a boy, and for a second the giant felt insulted. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" The voice echoed, and the Philistines laughed. The Israelites held their breath. Some thought, "That's it, this will end quickly." Goliath cursed David by his gods and promised to turn him into food for birds and beasts. David did not back away, but he did not rush either. He lifted his face and spoke loudly enough for the whole valley to hear. "You come against me with sword, spear, and shield. I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have insulted." It was not bravado. It was confession. "Today," David went on, "the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel. And this whole assembly will know that the Lord does not save by sword or by spear. The battle belongs to the Lord. Those words did something rare. They gave things their true names again. It wasn't the Philistines' war. It wasn't the duel of the century. It was the struggle between pride and the name. Goliath advanced. And then the crisis came. Not a crisis of action, but of the soul. Because in that exact moment, David was only a young man before someone who looked like a wall. There was no applause, no music, no camera. There was dust and a pounding heart. There was the real possibility of dying. And there, in the place where courage is tested, David chose. He ran. Not to flee. To shorten the time, fear had to speak. As he ran, he placed a stone in the sling. He swung it. One turn, two. The whole world seemed to narrow until it fit inside that circle of leather and cord. Goliath raised his weapon, ready to crush him, and the stone flew. There was no explosion, no spectacle. There was a dry sound, almost small, as if victory didn't need to shout. The stone struck the forehead. Goliath stopped. For a moment, the entire valley was voiceless, as if no one knew what to do with an impossible thing that had just happened. The giant staggered and fell with the weight of a world that had believed itself invincible. David ran to him. He took the Philistine's own sword, large, heavy, a symbol of power, and finished the fight. That was when the war changed hands. The Philistines saw their champion on the ground and understood, too late, that fear is a cruel king. It demands tribute until the day it falls. They retreated. Then they fled. And Israel, the same Israel that had stepped back one step each day, advanced as if it suddenly remembered who it was. Dust rose. Shouts exploded. The pursuit began. But in David's heart, there was something deeper than victory. There was a grateful silence. Because David knew. He knew the stone was not magic. The sling was not enchanted. The secret wasn't in technique, though he was skilled, but in something Saul had lost, a trust that does not need borrowed armor. Later, when the voices died down, someone asked David who he was, and hidden inside that simple question was a greater one. Where does this courage come from? David could have said, from my talent. He could have said, from my boldness. But the story isn't about that. He was Jesse's son, a shepherd, small, and it was precisely for that reason that God chose him to humble pride. Because when God wants to save a people, sometimes he begins by saving one single thing, the bowed head. And here is the turn almost no one notices when they hear David and Goliath as a tale. The most dangerous giant was not Goliath. It was shame. Goliath only prevailed because Israel had already accepted defeat on the inside. Victory began when David refused the armor of fear, when he said with his own life, "It isn't his size that decides, it's the name I carry." And now, let me ask you, no cheap poetry, straight to the point. What armor are you wearing because someone convinced you that you're not enough? What giant grows every time you lower your head? Maybe today, God isn't asking you for a sword. Maybe he's asking you for just this. Take off the armor that isn't yours and go down into the valley with the name on your lips, because in the end, the battle still belongs to the Lord, and the giant, no matter how large it seems, still falls.